Hey, there he is.
There he is.
I haven't seen you in such a long time.
Right. That's
Uh,
right, man.
Yeah, I've been following your career though. That's great. And well, it's great to see you. I should
Hey, bro.
explain to folks that are watching and listening to this that you and I worked together at WNYC in New York, and I left there in 2009. So it's been since then that we've had any contact. So hopefully we're all 15 years older and 15 years wiser in
But
the
what a year
interim.
we had, man. It was 1 year, but we
Yeah.
did some great stuff, man.
Yeah.
You were there
Well,
when I got there, and that was wonderful.
I remember.
Yeah.
Um, Listeners here may know your voice from some of the specials that we've aired that you voiced from WNYC, including the Martin Luther King Jr. special that was produced a while back, but we've aired it a few times here on FM 91. So you have an exciting new project that is coming out. It's coming out February 16th, right? Just after
That's correct.
Valentine's Day. This is a podcast and it's called Every Voice with Terrance McKnight. You are Terrance McKnight, obviously. Can you tell us what the whole encompassing idea of the project is?
Yeah. First of all, I'm from Ohio, so it's nice to be
That's right,
talking to
from
you.
Cleveland area,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah, I remember.
Ohioans. That's very meaningful for me because I grew up around music uh, in Ohio. I grew up in Cleveland, and you know, music was a big part of my life. And we had a great orchestra in Cleveland and some great music teachers, and a very diverse community in Ohio. Lots of ethnicities there, and so there was an opportunity to bring people together with music. And now that I'm a better musician and just have a little more wisdom behind me, I want to use that voice and my opportunity to do that, Brad. That's what it's about for me. And so this podcast is called Every Voice because, as I just said, I come from a very diverse community of people, and we're creating a show where everybody's voice, everybody's culture, is welcome. Our sort of tagline is many cultures, many voices, one people.
Yeah.
And so this show is going to get at the root of what makes us human across all of that, across no matter where we live, no matter what we look like or what our names sound like, it's going to get to that core human thing. And that's what the show is about. And we're going to start by looking at opera, something that you know very well. And
Yeah.
we're gonna start by looking at operas by Verdi, operas by Mozart, and I'm introducing a composer named Sharon Willis, who I remember composing when I was in school in Atlanta. She wrote operas, and I used to go and hear her operas, and was just always inspired by the folks who had never seen opera before, but would come hear Sharon Willis's operas because they made folks feel good. They
Yeah.
told stories that just resonated with people. So we'll introduce her as well.
Yeah. Well, going back to our days at WNYC, I remember your very first night on the air, and
You were there with me.
you were mixing genres there. You were playing Beethoven and also I can't remember, but songs from the that canon. And it's something that I think has been part of what you do for a long time, drawing those connections. Now, I want to steal a little bit of your thunder and learn more about your process and creating all of this. And you're slaying sacred cows here. You're talking about Mozart and Verdi and Shakespeare, even with the Othello, and other composers and other pieces of Western European classical music. You're tearing down the walls, and I just wonder if this is something that's been like gestating for you for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think about, in particular, when we think about opera, I remember when I looked at opera for the first time with any serious intent or study was when I was at Morehouse, and I was, in theory class. And I remember hanging out after class one day, and because I just like to I just enjoyed learning as much as possible when I was in music school. And I ended up working in the voice studio as an accompanist. And I remember being in theory one day after class, and I think a voice student was coming in, and whatever the music they were working on, I remember the professor, Uzi Brown, said, "Oh, well, you have to know what you're singing about. You have to, what are you singing? You can't, it's not enough to just sing the notes and sing the words in German or Italian. You have to know the text. You have to know the libretto." He said, "We already have a hard enough time." He said, "Because as a Black man, nobody wants to see a Black man on stage hugging a white woman." And that's been the problem with opera, especially here in the South. And I can hear that as clearly as he said it to me back in my sophomore year. I hear it. And so when I started this podcast, I thought we have to get to the crux of an issue that keeps us apart in the opera house. If you go to the opera house, man, you know who you're going to see. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't cut across racial lines. It oftentimes doesn't cut across age demographic. There is a particular audience. And some people will say it's based on, some socioeconomics. But I tell you what, man, people pay a lot of money to hear Drake or Beyonce. So those same people, I try to go see LeBron when I can, more Ohio. I try to go see LeBron when I can, but those tickets are costly. And so it's not always a matter of, who can afford an opera ticket. It's what's happening on that stage that's going to make people feel uplifted and validated and good about who they are. And in some cases, and in these cases of the operas that I'm discussing in this opera, and these operas in this series, they've left me feeling a little awkward and uneasy. And so what we're trying to get at is the humanity in these roles, create a little more understanding and some empathy for one another.
Yeah. Well, you're bursting the bubble, of Western European opera. You're kind of exposing or making people aware through this podcast of some of the really difficult issues right now. I mean, you have a lot of people complaining that classical music and specifically opera is dwindling, that the audiences are dwindling, but they're not looking for the obvious way out, which you point to in your podcast. I wonder if, I guess the question is, what do you think we should be doing to try to get those voices engaged with what is a very old, traditionally white form of entertainment? I mean, what can we do both as performers of color like yourself and old white guys on the radio, but who certainly understand and support everything that you're talking about? What should we be doing, do you think? Or what can we do?
I think the first step is, talking about things, talking about, how things make us feel and having honest conversations. I'll give you an example. When I was in school, as we're always trying to convince our friends to come hear the work we're doing. And, I would play piano recitals or just play a piece on a recital. And I would want my friends to come, and oh man, I would have to kind of coerce them to come. And I remember taking a friend to see an opera. We went to see Aida, and I just knew she was going to love it. I had never seen Aida, but I was like, okay, she's East African, and we're going to see this opera about, Ethiopia and Egypt. This will be right up her alley, right? And so 10 minutes into the opera, maybe 12, she says to me, "T, why are the Ethiopians Black and the Egyptians white?" And before long, the Ethiopians were in chains. And I remember sinking down in my seat. I was so embarrassed. you know, because, you know, I had Ethiopian friends who boasted, were very proud of the fact that Ethiopia wasn't colonized. And to see the Ethiopian representatives of Ethiopia in chains, not by other people of color, but this idea of this white master and slave, you know, person of color, just, it was very upsetting. And so I think if I were, you know, a director, I would take that into consideration and know that people have a feeling, they feel a certain way about that. And recently, Lemmy Pulliam was cast as the, you know, Radames, who became Aida's lover.
Right.
You know, and so now you have a brown man and a brown woman in this love relationship, which isn't often the case, Brad. You know, oftentimes it's a white guy who, you know, captures her father, and, you know, she falls in love with him in spite of everything. And so we're still perpetuating that idea of white master, black slave. And I think there needs to be a little more understanding and empathy about the diversity in our country and how people feel about that kind of stuff. And so those are the kind of things that we can do.
So would you preserve the music and alter the text maybe, or alter the production, the direction of the production to make it more diverse?
Yeah, I think, you know, again, I'm not a director, but if I had that call with that could be solved with casting.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
it's a little thing, but it's a huge thing when you're sitting there as a person of color and you're watching your people in chains, and, you know, and the white folks are in the master role.
Right.
And we, you know.
Well, you've got four characters, or one, two, three, yeah, four characters here. I can count to four. Aida is one of the characters that you do examine, but you also examine Otello, which is another opera by Verdi. And I have a horrible confession to make. I sang this role a few times back in the 1990s, and we did it in English, and we were very sensitive about trying to remove any kind of stereotypical racial elements from the libretto. But I appeared in dark makeup, and looking at as a whole, I mean, nowadays you would say it was blackface, which it really was, but it didn't occur to us or the production team. You know, it was an all-white cast, all-white production team. They weren't even aware, and I was not aware. Of course, I am aware of it now, but you know, you talk about your personal experience and sort of a wake-up call for what is going on in these operas. For me, that wake-up call came much later as I thought about the ramifications of everything that we did in presenting that character. You mentioned somebody like Lemmy Pulliam, who would be a magnificent Otello. I mean, that's a great voice, and he's a black man, and he should do it, definitely. But what do you think about white singers taking on traditional roles of color, or does that play into the whole stereotype racist rubric of Western European opera?
You know, man, you know, it may not be popular, but, you know, I know people who were very upset with Anna Netrebko
Right.
for putting on makeup to do Aida. Personally, me, I don't have an issue with that. She can sing what she wants to sing. But if you're going to sing Aida, then I don't think, again, it's the casting thing. Make everybody brown. Make everybody brown. Just don't have that white master, black slave relationship, or the white man conquering the black woman and her, you know, foregoing her relationship with her country and her family. I think that's the challenge. I mean, W.E.B. Du Bois talked about the challenge of the 20th century will be the color line. So every opportunity we have to try to eviscerate that idea of race, that construct of race. I mean, you know, again, that's why we say many cultures, many voices, one people. I mean, we're one people, and I think we have to take every opportunity to get to that. And you telling me that story, I never knew you played Othello and darked up to do that. But you telling me that story, Brad, that doesn't make me feel any different, but about you, just having more respect for you. You know, like I did the first time I met you, and our relationship grew from being honest and open with one another, treating each other with respect and dignity, and listening to one another. And I think that's what this podcast is about, giving everybody's voice an opportunity to be heard and to be felt and to be seen. And that's what we're trying to do with it.
Yeah. You mentioned Sharon Willis, and we've talked about some of the characters you're examining in the traditional scheme of opera. Can you talk about some of the other people that are going to join you on the podcast for different episodes?
Yeah. So our first episode is on Mozart's Magic Flute, and we deal with this character Monostatos. And Monostatos, that opera was written in 1791 in Austria, came to New York City in 1833. Monostatos is cast out as a slave. I've got a singer named Chauncey Packer who sung the role of Monostatos early in his career. He doesn't do it anymore. You know, some of the language, whether it's in Italian or, you know, German or English, you know, Monostatos says, you know, I am black and black is ugly. And, you know, I've been, and white is beautiful. And Chauncey decided I just can't sing that, you know? And so in more modern productions, they've tried not to cast Monostatos as a black person, but maybe as a green person or as a blue person, trying to find a way to other Monostatos. So maybe there is some progress in that casting. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk to a singer who's sung that role at the Met 15 times in other places around the world. We're going to talk to a great singer who sang at the Met in the 80s and 90s, Sylvia McNair. She's sung the role of Pamina, who was the Monostatos was very attracted to her. She was the object of his affection. We're going to talk to a soprano, Janina Burnett, who's also sung the role of Pamina. We'll talk to Kevin Maynor, who's sung the role of Sarastro. So we'll talk to a lot of the singers who've been featured in that opera. And that's where we are right now, man. We're working on the first 4 episodes, and then we'll move on from there. And of course, we're talking to Sharon Willis, whose operas deal with these very successful and interesting figures who come out of Black America, like Madam C.J. Walker, and you know, the young man Herndon, who grew up on a plantation and became a millionaire in Atlanta. She talks about York, who went on an expedition with Lewis and Clark. Just some very fascinating stories. She's written 16 operas, so we'll delve into her work.
Well, those stories in the operas of Sharon Willis, as well as plenty of other stories that have yet to be realized on the stage, are definitely worth telling. I mean, one solution to all of this that has been put up by people is, let's make new operas. Let's do something that, you know, takes into account the kind of issues that you're talking about. Well, what's your opinion on the production of new works and maybe even supplanting some of the traditional works that we're talking, or that you're talking about on this podcast?
Well, you know, man, I'm into new works, but I'm thinking that there is power in resurfacing some of these works from the past that have never been heard. You know, I think there's power in, I see it, you know, in working in classical music. I see how empowered our audience is by hearing stories that tell of their history and the beauty of their culture over centuries. And when we're talking about Black American culture, there were so many opera composers, you know, Scott Joplin, you know, William Grant Still, all of these composers writing operas in the 20s and 30s, because this isn't a brand new art form to African Americans. And for me, you know, when I told the Florence Price story back in 2011, Florence Price, born in 1887, and her music just sort of went away when she died in the 50s. But, we were able to bring it back and tell her story. And now, I think the New York Youth Symphony just won a Grammy, having recorded her piano concerto. So as much as I think new works are important, I think there are a lot of things that have happened, a lot of operas that have been written that can tell the beauty of our past.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I want to go back and listen to some of those works. Some have been recorded, most have not.
That's right.
Yeah. Let's mention again where people can get this podcast and listen to it. Is it going to be on the QXR website?
It'll be at QXR. It'll be at Apple Music.
Okay.
Be at,
all the usual suspects.
Wherever you get podcasts.
Yeah. That's good to know. Terrance McKnight, it's so good to see your face and hear your voice. I'm kind of seeing your voice too. But this sounds like a really exciting and important podcast, and one that I think everybody has to listen to, because it really takes on issues that, the casual listener may not even be aware of, even though they are simpatico to everything that you're talking about in this podcast. So thank you so much for joining me, and best of luck with your future episodes. And we look forward to tuning in.
Thanks for your interest, Brad. Great seeing you, man.